I'm going to be talking this morning on the theme clarity and power. And it's an interesting one because clarity comes as a result of really being aware, being clear on what things are about. And sometimes things are said one way, mean something else. And yet it can be very, very clear. Other times things are said and completely misinterpreted, and you don't know quite what it means. But I want to read something to you. Some things. I picked this up on the internet. These are signs that appear in the front of churches. They have little slogans and so forth. And there's no question about what they're saying, and yet there seems to be. You might question whether it's really clear, but it's really clear. Here's one that appeared in the Baptist Church. Donaldson View Baptist Church. Forgive your enemies. It messes with their minds. Isn't that neat? Now that's really clear. Here's another one. I have a whole bunch. I'm not going to read them all. Here's another one that comes from a Christian center. Artificial intelligence is no match for natural stupidity. What a wonderful sermon title, isn't it? And here's one that I also like very much. Read the Bible. It'll scare the hell out of you. Okay, well, we don't believe in that anyway. The Bible's okay. Now, here's the one that I really, really like, and double entendre kind of a thing. This is from St. Cyril of Alexandria Catholic Church, Diocese of Galveston, Houston. Staying in bed shouting, "Oh God," does not constitute going to church. Anyway. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that. Anyway, we can say one thing and mean something else, and sometimes we can say things that there appear to be contradictions, and at the same time it's very, very clear. Clarity, by my dictionary, simply means to be clear. Almost redundant, isn't it? It means to easily perceive, understand, or interpret where there is no doubt or confusion, free of anything that obstructs or obscures one's perception of the truth. I want to give you an example of the opposite of clarity. You know what the opposite of clarity is? Obfuscation. Isn't that a wonderful word? I don't think I've ever used it except here today in this sermon. And this was written by a lawyer. No offense, Ed. This was written by a lawyer, and you already offended, huh? And I want you to tell me what it means. Well, that's a rhetorical question, but you can think in your mind, what does this really mean? The undersigned, hereinafter called guarantor, for and in consideration of the sum of $10 and other good and valuable consideration in hand paid to guarantor, the receipt and sufficiency of which is hereby acknowledged, and to induce the XYZ Bank, a national banking association with offices and banking quarters at above address, hereinafter called bank, at its option, at any time, from time to time, to loan monies with or without security to or for the account of customer's name, hereinafter called borrower, and at the special insistence that request of bank, guarantor hereby unconditionally guarantees the prompt payment at maturity of the following hereinafter called indebtedness. And the indebtedness then is described. You all got that, didn't you? Sure you did. You know what that means? You do? Yes. Well, okay. Well, somebody, I'm not going to ask you. What it means, I think, is that if I co-sign on the note and the borrower defaults on the note, I'm stuck with the debt. Now, isn't that amazing? Called obfuscation. Now, sometimes it's difficult to really get at the truth of something depending on how we describe it, depending on the words that we use, depending on the energies that we bring to it. Clarity is being free of anything that obscures one's perception of the truth. And what is the truth? And this is where we get at the crux of what I'm really talking about here today. You know, very often we say, well, the truth, know the truth and this truth will set you free. And the truth to people is to what it is they observe about what goes on out there. And that's a pretty good definition, actually. But when we talk about truth in a context like this, what we're talking about is something much more fundamental, something deeper. Meister Eckhart, the great Dominican priest of the 13th century, the mystic that so many of us have read about, he made a comment that I like so very much that speaks from a fundamental basic truth, and it goes something like this. You've heard me use this before. To me, all things are possible because I am one with that to which all things are possible. Isn't that a wonderful affirmation? To me, all things are possible because I am one with that to which all things are possible. I am one with God. I am made in the image and likeness of God. In the beginning was this essence, was the Word, the creative impulse behind all things. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And there was nothing made except that which was made through the expression of that Word. Those are the first 3 verses, basically, of the Gospel of John. It's a creation story. What it is, with a capital I, it being God, the infinite, I am of that. I am made after that. Everything issued out of that into expression as every one of us and everything that we see. And it's hard for us to get our minds around that. But that is the truth of who we are. And this is what we want to gain clarity about. And when we gain clarity about that, what we find is that little by little we begin to subjectively open ourselves to the point where we can embrace the idea. And in the embracing of the idea, we begin to experience a certain kind of power, ability, an impulse to be able to give ourselves to something that is within us that we may not have known was there before, or another way of put it, may not have want to admit was there for us to express. Now knowing that truth is a kind of clarity. I mean, it's the deepest kind of clarity. There's another kind of clarity too. And a little story will illustrate this. You know, back about 2,000 years ago, there was a Roman writer, philosopher, naturalist, whatever you want to call him, scientist. His name was Pliny. It's called Pliny the Elder. And he told a story in his writings about the setting of an obelisk in Egypt. You know, an obelisk like the National Monument or the Washington Monument. And this was about almost 100 feet tall. It was 99 feet tall. And they brought together a bunch of people. This thing was built and then they had to hoist it into place. And they brought together 20,000 workers that were going to use all the ropes and the pulleys and all of the apparatus to activate this system to hoist this obelisk in a vertical position. And one little slip, one thing done wrong, and it could fall and break. And the king, wanting to ensure that every bit of attention was given to doing this correctly, got hold of the engineer in charge and said, when you hoist this, we're going to strap your son to the very apex of this obelisk. Now, do you think that maybe his heart and his head were both in this process? Do you think that perhaps this ensured his complete attention and the best direction of the best minds that they had available? Now this is, I guess you could call this a clarity through focus. And I don't necessarily recommend it as a way of us gaining clarity. And yet sometimes we have to put ourselves in position where We have to bring into question the very things we value in order to be able to gain the kind of focus that we need to do something. I don't recommend this necessarily because this is often what I call functioning in a crisis. I know a lot of people who've been very, very creative, but their creativity only comes through when they find themselves in a crisis. They manage to do something every time that they're in a project to put them in a situation where the consequences can be awful. And then they perform, and they perform beautifully. I think more importantly, in order to gain the kind of clarity, to exercise the kind of power in life that I think we all can, it's much more efficient, it's much better, it's much easier on the nervous system, and it's more effective in the long run to begin to get this idea that all that God is, I am. All that God is at the infinite level, I am at this finite level. You know, Dr. Ernest Holmes, our founder, makes that wonderful comment where he says, God in me, as me, is me. Think about that. That's a tough one to get your head around, isn't it? It's a tough one to say, God in me, as me, is me. Now, I've said this to friends of mine that are not involved in the kind of metaphysics that we speak of here. And they say, that sounds pretty egotistical to me. I says, no, it's not egotistical. What it is an acknowledgement of the truth of what and who we are. And if there's a divine ego, then that divine ego is one that acknowledges that inner presence. But to say that God in me, as me, is a very hard thing for people to accept. I don't care whether you accept it or not. Take it and look at it as a working premise. And begin to think, whenever you encounter situations in life, and you can even put it in the form of an inquiry, if God in me, as me, is me, what are the consequences of my actions at this particular time? And you begin to see that there is incredible capability and opportunity and possibilities that you have for being able to experience and express in whole new ways. Let's talk a little bit about the other part of that sentence. Clarity is power. Scientific definition of power is the ability to do work. Now that's a very qualitative definition, but it's a very accurate one. And nobody's going to argue that. You can find all kinds of formulas and equations and so forth for what power is. But power is the ability to do work, and that works in the secular arena also. The definition that comes out of my dictionary is that power is the ability to act or produce an effect. Sometimes we can act to produce an effect, we can exercise power, and yet because we don't have the clarity, we're not using the power to its greatest effectiveness. Example. There was a missionary by the name of Herbert Jackson. He went off, it was just after he got out of school, and he got his doctorate degree, and he went off to a strange land, I think it was in Africa. And when he got there as a missionary, they assigned him to a house. He had a nice little house. It was he and his wife and a child. And they also gave him a car. And the fellow that he was replacing was there, and he was showing him around, showing him the ropes, so to speak. And he got to the car, and he says, well, now here's the car. He says, you know, I've been using this car for 2 years, and it runs beautifully. The only problem is you have to push it to get it started. And so he told him all about how to push the car to get it started, and he started to push the car. He went and got some of the kids out of the school where he was going to be working. They pushed the car, got it started, and he got a system together. He put together this system where he always would park the car when he would park it for any period of time, and he'd park it on a hill. So, he's showing him around. And he got to the part of the car, and before he got very far, the young new missionary said to him, he says, well, hold it just a second, pop the hood. So, interrupted in his little spiel on the automobile, popped the hood, guy lifted it up, looked in there, and he says, "Oh," he says, "I think I see what's wrong. You got a loose connection." He reached down, twisted it a little bit, created a little bit of bind on it. Didn't even have to put a wrench on it. Gets in the car, turns the key, and the engine starts. For 2 years, he was running around with a loose connection. Now, there's really a metaphor there for many of us, isn't there? How many of us have not taken full advantage because we didn't bring the clarity to a situation to be able to think through a situation? And no, I don't really want to show hands. But you see, this often happens. There is a tremendous power that's available to us in almost every area, and yet we haven't really connected with it. So, there's clarity, and there's power in clarity. And this is the theme of what I'm talking about here this morning. The power was there all the time. The idea that I'm dealing with here this morning is that we can access all of the resources that are available to us, and there are a great many of them, when we do 3 things. Number 1, to recognize or acknowledge that resources are available to us. And the recognition of them is so often involves having clarity. Being at peace with yourself so that you're not distracted by so many other things, so that you can begin to see a little bit more clearly. So you can easily perceive and understand or interpret what's going on in your life. The second thing, well, it's to recognize, and then the second thing is to acknowledge, or it could be to acknowledge and then recognize. They go together. But finally, you got to use them. I want to read something to you that Dr. Ernest Holmes writes in this book called The Science of Mind. It's under the section, it's in the glossary, it's under the word power. And I'm going to read quite a bit of this. I may annotate it a little bit as I go through. He says, "The energy by which everything lives, that's what power is. The creative medium of the Spirit itself." I mean, Spirit acts through this field of creativity. And that's what he says the power is. It's the great mental law, if you will, of the universe. It is the one medium through which all of law and all of power operate. And man's creative power is marvelous. For every time he thinks, he sets the law in motion. As his thought sets the law in motion, he is specializing it for some definite purpose. And I think about this. This should all give us a sense of incredible freedom, shouldn't it? That when we think, when we focus, when we are clear, we actually set in motion. We don't set a law in motion. The law just always does what it does. We set in motion a lawful process that's going to produce after the cause behind it. That is, according to what we put into this process. And then he goes on finally. He says, it leaves each to work out his own salvation, not being saved from the ravages of eternal hell. That's not what salvation is. Salvation is being saved from the ignorance that leads to our enslavement to our own ideas. Not with fear or trembling, but with a calm sense of peace and assurance. Man, and this is the key sentence in this whole thing. I should have gone straight to it. Man, the human being, may transmute as much of the infinite energy into degrees of power as he chooses to use. You can transmute as much of this infinite energy within which you live, move, and have your being, are surrounded by, that totally fills you, as you choose to use. Now you look at this and say, these are all nice words, they're encouraging and makes me feel good about myself, but what the heck do I do with it all now? How do we come to the point of developing the kind of belief and confidence in that power, that thing that essence that surrounds us, that within which we live. Well, I want to leave you with three things. I call them the three I's. I could have said four I's, include my name, Impressia, but that I don't quite know how to work that in. But the three I's are these: inquiry, inspiration, and involvement. Let's look at inquiry. Our curiosity, our ability to be able to inquire into life, what we study, what the classes we take, the books we read, all of this informational context within which we work. We have choices to make. And sometimes if we're reading, if all we're reading are funny books, well, some of them are pretty good, comic books, but if that's all we read, we're probably not getting the broadest representation of the knowledge that the world holds for us. So the kind of inquiry we make is very, very important. But one of the problems that a lot of people do is they'll take classes, they'll go to workshops, they'll read books, they'll take classes, go to workshops, read books, and they keep doing this over and over and over, and they really think they're getting somewhere. And they are. It's good to be able to gain information that helps support ideas. But is that enough? I don't think it is. So we have to go another step, and that's where inspiration comes in. Where do you get your inspiration? Inspiration, that which gives you that inner impulse to express something that may be there, that goes beyond just all the information that you've accumulated. Well, what I do a lot of, is pay very careful attention to my associations. Who are the people that I associate with? Do they support me in where I am and what I want to do and where I'm going? Or are they people that are constantly yakety, negative, griping, moaning, and complaining? Well, some of them, I guess, because I find myself doing enough of that myself, so I'm bound to attract some of that. But begin to direct your attention to people that are going to support you in your process, and people for whom you can be of support also. I like to associate or read about, study successful people. I read a lot of biographies, and I get jazzed. And one of the things I've noticed about reading these biographies, whether they are biographies of educators or spiritual people or lawyers, even lawyers, or military, some of the great generals and military leaders, politicians, and on down the line, any of them, every one of them speaks to beauty, compassion, love, balance, and harmony, and I want to know what it is they did. And then I want to try to replicate that in my life. The third thing, involvement. There are really two kinds of involvement. There's the very active involvement, the Mother Teresa kind of involvement that we've talked about just recently. Out there working among the people. And Marcia, my wife, was just telling me yesterday about a group that she came into contact with that sounds so wonderful, and I know she's going to somehow get involved in it, or at least a good indication of that. This is a group that works with, that supports, that encourages people that are experiencing certain kinds of illnesses. And this is the kind of thing. Working on the behalf of other people opens you to a real creativity that begins to flow not only into the lives of the people with whom you are working, but through your life and into everything that you are doing. These are doing the good works. That's one kind of active participation in life or involvement. And the other kind is I call the inactive participation. And it's not really inactive because all of the activity takes place within, and it can be very intensely active within. And I'm talking about spiritual practices. We talk about affirmation, we talk about prayer, we talk about spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer. We talk about meditation, we talk about a meditative contemplation. All of these processes, but they don't do you any good unless you use them. And I want to put in a little plug for John's workshop this afternoon, Commanding God. He's going to be talking to you about affirmative prayer, spiritual mind treatment. And you talk to him afterwards when you're having your coffee here. These are the kinds of things to really involve yourself in. And when you do, you find you begin to open up avenues where you gain greater clarity. And in the gaining of this greater clarity, then you are able to access the innate power that is within you and within which you live and have your whole existence. 3 things: inquire, inspire, and involve. Let's have a prayer, shall we? There is one power, there is one presence, there is one essence, there is just one thing. We call that God. By whatever name, it is indistinguishable from any other concept that others may have according to the names they give it. God, Allah, Brahman, whatever. I am made in the image and likeness of that. I know that there is one life, just one life. That life is my life. That life is the life of all. It is the life of everyone here. And the one mind, the mind of God, is the mind within which we all exist. It is my mind. It is my mind right now. And within that is all the creativity, all of the intelligence, all of the harmony, all of the balance, all of the joy, all of the love, all of the substance, all of the order of the universe. And I live in the midst of that, and it lives in the midst of me. I can say that because I am one with it, as is everyone. And it's in the realization of this truth, it is in the gaining of clarity of this truth, that the infinite power of the universe is activated in my life, that God becomes real in and through all that I am doing. And as a result of this, it is natural to be healed of all discord, of all imbalance. And I accept that healing for myself. I accept it for everyone here. I know that it's so. I rejoice that it's so. I allow it to be so. And together we declare, and so it is.